In a quiet corner of the countryside, surrounded by tall trees and green fields, there stood an old convent. Its walls were covered with ivy, and the soft sunlight often streamed through the windows, making the rooms warm and peaceful. Inside lived a group of nuns, all devoted to a life of prayer and simple living. Among them was an elderly nun whose presence was calm and gentle, like a soft breeze on a summer morning. She had spent most of her life within these walls, tending the garden, helping others, and keeping the convent alive with small acts of care. Her face had lines that told stories of years gone by, and her hands, though slightly stiff with age, held a quiet strength. She had a secret that few in the convent knew. Hidden beneath the routine of her daily life was a deep love for music, especially the piano. When she was young, long before joining the convent, she had played piano in small gatherings and local events. Her fingers once danced across the keys with grace and speed, and her music had the power to touch hearts. But time had passed, and life had taken her along a path of devotion and simplicity. The piano in the convent had gathered dust, tucked away in a corner of the common hall. She often walked past it, her eyes lingering for a moment, a soft smile on her face, and then continued with her chores. Each morning she would wake before sunrise. She liked the quiet moments, when the world was still asleep. She would light a candle, kneel in prayer, and then step outside to tend to the garden. The soil felt cool under her fingers, and the smell of flowers and herbs brought her a sense of peace. As she worked, she would hum melodies from her youth, soft tunes that no one could hear. It was her own secret world, a small place where music and memory intertwined. The convent itself was not a place of strict silence. There was laughter, soft conversations, and the occasional sound of footsteps echoing through the corridors. Yet there was a sense of order, a rhythm to daily life. Meals were shared in silence, with brief prayers before and after. Tasks were divided, and each nun had her own responsibilities. The elderly nun's role had become one of quiet guidance. Younger sisters often came to her for advice or simply to sit and talk. She listened patiently, offering gentle words, her experience and calm presence making others feel at ease. Despite the serenity of the convent, the elderly nun sometimes felt a restlessness in her heart. She thought about the music she once played, the joy it had brought her and others. She remembered small audiences, the applause, the smiles, and even the tears that music had evoked. It was not fame she longed for, but the feeling of creation, the expression of something deep and beautiful through her fingertips. The thought of touching the piano again made her heart flutter, even if she believed it was too late. One afternoon, as she was sweeping the floor of the common hall, she paused near the piano. The wood was scratched and worn, and a thin layer of dust covered the keys. She ran her fingers lightly over them, feeling the cool touch beneath her skin. A memory came rushing back, a lively piece she had learned as a young girl, one that always made people smile. She closed her eyes and imagined the music, the flow of notes, the rise and fall of the melody. A small smile appeared on her lips, but she shook her head gently, as if scolding herself for indulging in daydreams. The younger nuns sometimes noticed her pauses and wondered what occupied her thoughts. They knew she had once played the piano, but it was a topic rarely spoken about. The elderly nun herself had never mentioned it, believing that her days of performance were behind her. Yet, in the quiet of her room at night, she would hum softly, letting the tunes fill the small space. Her heart ached a little for the music that had been part of her life for so long, now tucked away like an old photograph in a forgotten drawer. One morning, the convent received a letter from a local organization. They were planning a charity event and suggested that the sisters might perform to entertain the guests. The elderly nun read the letter slowly, her eyes lingering on each word. A flutter of excitement rose in her chest, quickly followed by doubt. Could she play again after all these years? Would her hands remember the keys, her fingers the movements? And what would others think of an old nun attempting music at her age? For days, she walked through the convent lost in thought. She tended the garden with a distracted hand, prepared meals with a wandering mind, and sometimes found herself staring out the window for long stretches. The piano called to her silently, like an old friend waiting patiently. She remembered her youth, the practice hours, the small victories, the joy of creating something that had no words but spoke to everyone who listened. Music had been her companion in solitude, her language when words were not enough. At the same time, she knew the convent valued humility and simplicity. The thought of stepping into a spotlight, even for a good cause, seemed almost frivolous. She did not want to seem proud or boastful. The younger nuns noticed her hesitation and offered gentle encouragement, though none pushed too hard. One of the younger sisters, who had a deep love for music herself, suggested that maybe the music could be for everyone, not just for the event, but as a way to share something beautiful. The elderly nun smiled at this thought, but shook her head softly, unsure if she had the strength or courage. Evenings in the convent were quiet. The elderly nun would sit by the window, a cup of tea in her hands, and watch the sky change colors. The birds returned to their nests, the trees swayed in the breeze, and the world outside moved on, unaware of the small storm of thoughts within her. She reflected on her life, the choices she had made, the paths taken, and those left behind. Music had been a constant, even if silent now. It reminded her that joy could exist quietly, in small moments, and that age did not erase talent or passion. One day, as she passed the piano once more, she felt a sudden impulse. She lifted the dust cloth gently, revealing the worn keys underneath. She pressed a single note, then another, and slowly, a simple melody emerged. It was hesitant at first, as if the piano itself remembered her fingers from long ago. But as she continued, the notes became smoother, the tune more confident. She paused, listening to the sound echo softly in the empty hall. A warmth spread through her chest, a feeling of connection to the life she had lived and the music she had loved. From that moment, a quiet determination began to grow. She did not speak of it to anyone, but each day she found small moments to practice. Sometimes in the early morning, sometimes in the late evening, she would sit at the piano and let the music flow. Her fingers, though slower and stiffer than in her youth, remembered the shapes and movements. Her heart, filled with memories and longing, guided the melody. Each note was a gentle reminder that life had more to give, that passion and talent were not bound by age or circumstance. The convent, with its serene walls and peaceful gardens, became a sanctuary not just for prayer, but for rediscovery. The elderly nun moved through her days with a quiet excitement, a secret joy that brightened her every step. Though no one knew, the music lived within her once more, ready to emerge when the time was right. She tended to her duties, helped her sisters, and continued to find solace in prayer, but a new light glimmered in her eyes. A light born of music, memory, and the gentle courage to follow her heart once again. The letter about the charity event stayed in the elderly nun's mind for days. Each time she thought of it, her heart beat faster, but a shadow of doubt followed closely behind. She loved music more than anything, yet the thought of performing in front of strangers made her nervous. She asked herself if her hands could still move as they used to, if the melodies stored in her memory would return, and if her body could endure the effort. She had lived a quiet life for decades, tending to the convent and helping others, and suddenly the idea of stepping into the world outside these walls felt overwhelming. The younger nuns noticed a change in her demeanor. She seemed distracted, sometimes staring off into space while sweeping the floors or arranging flowers. One of them, curious and gentle, asked her if she was thinking about the event. The elderly nun nodded slowly, her fingers twisting the hem of her apron. She admitted she wanted to play, but she feared she might fail. The young nun smiled and encouraged her, saying that the music in her heart was more important than perfection. Still, the elderly nun hesitated. Fear had become a constant companion, whispering doubts whenever she imagined playing for others. Each morning, she woke before dawn, trying to prepare herself mentally. She would kneel in prayer, asking for guidance and courage, and then step outside to her small garden. The soil felt familiar beneath her hands, and the flowers seemed to listen as she whispered her worries. As she worked, she hummed softly, letting the tunes come alive in her mind. Sometimes, She allowed herself to sit by the old piano, lightly pressing keys to see if the melodies would awaken. Her fingers shook at first, and she could barely remember some pieces, but the joy of touching the keys again filled her with a warmth that made her continue. Her mind often drifted to memories of her youth, when she played in small gatherings and local events. She remembered the thrill of seeing people smile and the hush that fell when the music touched their hearts. She recalled the hours of practice, the struggle to perfect each note, and the pride of accomplishment. Those memories were bittersweet. They reminded her of what she could do, yet also of the years that had passed. The world outside the convent seemed far away now, and she worried she might not fit in anymore. One afternoon, she heard voices approaching the piano room. A few younger sisters peeked inside, curious about what she had been doing. She quickly stepped back, a little embarrassed. They asked if she would play for the event, but she shook her head gently. She explained that she feared her age and trembling hands would make her performance imperfect. The younger sisters, however, were not easily discouraged. They spoke kindly, telling her that the audience would not expect perfection, only sincerity and beauty. Their encouragement planted a small seed of hope in her heart, but doubt still lingered. Even as she practiced in secret, the elderly nun faced physical challenges. Her fingers were stiff, and her joints ached after a few minutes at the piano. She would stop often, massaging her hands and taking deep breaths. There were moments of frustration when she could not recall a melody or her fingers refused to move as she wanted. Yet, she persisted. Music had been her companion for most of her life, and she was determined not to let it fade entirely. Slowly, the notes began to flow more smoothly, and she felt a sense of progress, even if it was small and gradual. The convent was a place of observation and quiet understanding. Some sisters noticed her commitment and whispered words of support. Others were skeptical, not out of unkindness but because they could not imagine the elderly nun performing after so many years. She did not mind their doubts. She knew the truth of her own heart. Music was not something she did for approval but for the joy it gave her and, one day, the chance to share it. Still, the idea of playing in public remained a heavy burden on her mind. She began to imagine the day of the event more vividly. She pictured herself sitting at the piano, the audience watching silently, waiting for her first note. She felt her heart race at the thought, and her hands trembled even as she imagined the keys beneath her fingers. The fear of making mistakes was strong, but a quiet determination grew alongside it. She reminded herself that she had lived a life of devotion and care, and that courage was not only about bravery in grand acts, but also about following one's heart despite fear. Late one evening, after the convent had gone to bed, she sat by the piano alone. The room was dimly lit, and the air was still. She pressed a few keys softly, letting the sounds fill the empty hall. Slowly, she began to play a simple melody she remembered from her youth. It was not perfect, but it was alive. Each note carried memories, emotions, and a quiet power that reminded her why she had loved music so much. Tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness but from the overwhelming feeling of reconnecting with a part of herself she had long neglected. Over the next few days, she continued to practice secretly, finding moments when no one could see her. Her hands grew stronger, and her confidence began to return, even if only slightly. She realized that fear and doubt were part of the journey, but they could not stop her from pursuing what she loved. The piano, once a forgotten piece of furniture, had become her companion again, and the music she played became a quiet voice of hope and resilience. One morning, the convent received a reminder about the charity event. The elderly nun felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She knew the time to decide was near. The younger nuns who supported her encouraged her gently, assuring her that her music would inspire others, just as it had inspired her own heart. The elderly nun thought about her life, the decades of care and devotion, and realized that perhaps this was a chance to give back in a new way, not for fame or recognition, but to share a gift that had been waiting quietly within her all these years. She began to plan in her mind which pieces she might play, choosing melodies that were gentle, emotional, and expressive. She practiced variations of familiar tunes, imagining the flow of her fingers, the rise and fall of each note, and the way the audience might respond. Each day, she grew more confident, though the shadow of doubt never fully disappeared. She understood that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to continue despite it. As the day of the event approached, the elderly nun felt a mix of emotions: anticipation, anxiety, and a deep sense of purpose. She continued her secret practices, sometimes losing herself in the music for hours. Her body ached at times, and there were moments when she wondered if she should stop. But each time, she reminded herself of the joy music brought her and the possibility of touching hearts once again. The convent, with its quiet walls and familiar routines, had prepared her in ways she never realized. Her life of devotion, patience, and care had given her the inner strength to face this challenge. Finally, the day before the event, she sat by the piano, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about her youth, her quiet life in the convent, the doubts that had tested her, and the moments of courage that had allowed her to reconnect with her music. She realized that the act of preparing to play was itself a triumph, a proof that passion and determination could overcome fear and time. She pressed the keys softly, feeling the familiar joy and power of music flowing through her once more, ready to face the world outside the convent walls. The elderly nun had decided that she would continue her practice no matter the obstacles. Each day, she carved out time to sit at the old piano, the dust long since brushed away. Her fingers were not as agile as they once were, and sometimes they trembled over the keys, but she refused to let that stop her. She remembered the feeling of music flowing through her, the joy it had given her in her youth, and the quiet satisfaction of mastering a melody. These memories kept her going, and slowly her confidence began to grow. Her practice sessions became a ritual. In the early mornings, when the convent was still wrapped in silence, she would sit alone at the piano. The sunlight streamed softly through the windows, casting warm patterns on the worn wooden floor. She pressed the keys gently at first, feeling out the old familiar shapes and patterns. Each note she played brought back a memory, a feeling, a piece of her life she had tucked away. She found herself smiling as the music filled the empty hall, a private concert for her own heart. But it was not easy. Some days her fingers refused to cooperate, stiff and unyielding from years of little use. Her hands ached, and her joints protested. She would stop, rest them in her lap, and take deep breaths. Yet she never gave up. She reminded herself that perseverance had always been part of her nature. Music was not something she could abandon after decades of devotion. Even when mistakes came, she learned from them, correcting notes, adjusting her timing, and letting the melody unfold at its own pace. She began to experiment with different tunes, mixing the old melodies she remembered with her own improvisations. Sometimes she would close her eyes and let her emotions guide her fingers. The music that emerged was not perfect, but it was alive, full of heart and honesty. She realized that her own life experiences added depth to her playing. The years of quiet devotion, the moments of joy and sorrow, and the simple beauty of everyday life all shaped the way she expressed herself through music. The younger sisters occasionally noticed her practicing, though she mostly kept her sessions private. Some would peek in quietly, admiring the concentration on her face and the delicate movements of her hands. A few were curious and wanted to learn from her, inspired by the quiet determination she displayed. The elderly nun would smile at them, offering gentle guidance if asked, but she did not want to show too much. This was her personal journey, a rediscovery of something deeply precious. Even as she practiced, doubts continued to linger. She worried about the upcoming charity event and whether she would be able to perform in front of strangers. She questioned if her hands would hold up for the entire performance, if she would remember the melodies, if her timing would be right. At times, the fear of failure felt overwhelming, and she considered giving up. But then she would sit at the piano again, press a key, and hear the familiar sound that reminded her why she had begun this journey. The music gave her courage, and with each note, she felt more prepared. Her emotional journey was as important as her physical preparation. Each session at the piano stirred memories of her past, of moments of happiness, loss, and reflection. She remembered playing for her family as a child, feeling the excitement of performing in small gatherings, and the pride in mastering a challenging piece. These recollections made her heart swell and reminded her of the resilience she had carried through life. Music had always been a companion, a source of comfort, and a way to express what words could not. She also thought about the audience she would face at the event. She imagined them sitting quietly, waiting for the first note to sound. She hoped they would feel the same emotions she felt when she played, that they would be touched not by perfection, but by sincerity and the beauty of the music itself. This thought gave her purpose. She was no longer practicing just for herself. She was preparing to share a piece of her soul with others. The responsibility was heavy, but it also gave her a sense of fulfillment she had not experienced in years. The convent, with its peaceful walls and familiar routines, became a place of preparation and reflection. The elderly nun continued to fulfill her daily duties, tending the garden, preparing meals, and assisting her fellow sisters. Yet, her mind often drifted back to the piano. Each task she completed felt like a small rehearsal for the larger performance to come. She found connections between the patience required in daily chores and the patience required in mastering music. Life itself seemed to have become a melody, each day a note contributing to a larger, beautiful piece. As the weeks passed, her fingers grew stronger, and her confidence increased. The melodies she had feared forgetting began to flow naturally, and her improvisations became more fluid. She discovered new ways to express herself, combining technical skill with the depth of her experiences. The music she created was not only a reflection of her past, but also a testament to her present strength and determination. She realized that age had not diminished her talent. It had given her a new perspective, adding richness and emotion that she could never have conveyed as a young performer. She also began to consider the story she would tell through her music. Each piece she played would carry meaning, a message of hope, resilience, and the enduring power of passion. She wanted her audience to understand that life's challenges did not have to silence creativity or joy. Her own journey had shown her that courage was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, persistent, and deeply personal. The music she played would be an extension of that belief, a way to communicate with hearts she had never met. As the day of the event drew nearer, the elderly nun felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She continued to practice daily, pushing herself gently while respecting the limits of her body. She focused on the flow of the melodies, the emotional impact of each note, and the connection she hoped to establish with her audience. Her dedication was unwavering, and each session brought her closer to the moment when she would finally sit before the audience and share her gift. One evening, as she played a particularly challenging piece, she paused and looked around the empty hall. The sunlight had faded, and the room was bathed in the soft glow of evening. She realized how far she had come, how much she had grown in confidence and skill. The doubts that had once weighed heavily on her mind now seemed distant, overshadowed by the joy and fulfillment of reconnecting with her music. She felt a quiet sense of pride, not in herself alone, but in the journey she had undertaken and the courage she had shown. Her preparation was not just about mastering the notes, it was about understanding the music itself. She listened closely to each melody, feeling the rise and fall, the pauses and crescendos, and the emotions conveyed in every phrase. She discovered nuances she had never noticed before, subtleties that added depth and beauty to her playing. Her connection to the piano grew stronger, and she felt as if she were speaking a language that transcended words, a language that could touch hearts and inspire souls. Despite the progress she had made, the elderly nun remained humble. She knew that performing in public was a challenge that required not only skill but also courage and grace. She continued to pray for guidance and strength, asking for the wisdom to convey the emotions of the music and the patience to handle any mistakes that might occur. Her spirituality and dedication to her faith became intertwined with her music, creating a harmony that strengthened her resolve. As the night approached, she sat quietly at the piano, letting the silence fill the room. She reflected on the journey she had undertaken, the obstacles she had faced, and the growth she had experienced. She understood that the act of preparing, of practicing, and of confronting her doubts was itself a triumph. The music she had rediscovered was more than just notes and melodies. It was a reflection of her life, her resilience, and her unyielding spirit. She was ready, not only to play but to share a piece of herself with the world, and that realization filled her with a quiet, steady joy that she had not felt in many years. The day of the charity event arrived with a gentle golden sunrise. Birds chirped softly outside the convent, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers. The elderly nun awoke early, as usual, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness that made her heart flutter. Today was the day she had prepared for, the day she would step beyond the quiet walls of the convent and bring her music to the world. She dressed carefully in her simple habit, smoothing her hands over the fabric to calm the slight tremor of anticipation. Every step she took felt deliberate, as if her body understood the importance of this moment. The convent sisters gathered together to walk to the venue, their steps quiet on the cobbled paths. The elderly nun felt their presence as a comforting support, but there was also a tension in the air. Some of the younger sisters whispered encouragement, while others watched silently, unsure of what the day would bring. The nun's mind wandered through memories of her life, of the times she had played piano as a child, the hours spent practicing, and the joy music had given her. These thoughts steadied her, reminding her of the love she carried for her craft and the courage she had nurtured over the past weeks. When they arrived at the venue, a small hall decorated with flowers and soft lighting, the elderly nun paused at the doorway. The room was filled with people from the community, volunteers, and guests who had come to support the charity. She felt a sudden pang of nervousness, a fear that she might not be able to perform as she had imagined. The piano sat on the small stage, polished and inviting, its keys gleaming under the soft lights. She walked slowly toward it, her hands brushing over the edges as she took her seat, feeling the cool keys beneath her fingers. The memories of her practice sessions rushed back, and she took a deep breath, letting the calm she had cultivated in the convent settle over her. Other performers went on before her, sharing songs, recitations, and small skits. Each act was met with polite applause, and the elderly nun watched from backstage, her fingers resting lightly on the piano keys, feeling the energy of the room. Her heart beat faster with each passing moment, the anticipation growing heavier. She reminded herself that the music belonged to her, that it had always been a part of her, and that the audience was there to listen, not judge. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the melodies she had practiced in secret fill her mind. Just as she was about to begin, a small obstacle appeared. One of the coordinators approached, gently suggesting that her performance be delayed. There were concerns about timing and logistics, they explained, and the elderly nun felt a flicker of doubt return. She could feel the weight of years pressing down on her, whispering that she might be too old, too frail, or too inexperienced to handle this moment. The young visitor who had encouraged her practice stepped forward, speaking firmly yet kindly. They argued that her performance was special, that it mattered more than the schedule, and that the audience deserved to hear her music. The elderly nun felt gratitude swell in her chest and nodded, trusting that she would finally have her chance. She adjusted her posture, placed her fingers carefully on the keys, and took a deep, steadying breath. The hall grew quiet as the audience sensed something unique about to happen. She began with a soft, gentle melody, each note floating gracefully through the room. At first, her fingers trembled slightly, and she paused, gathering her confidence. Then, as the music continued, something remarkable happened. The notes seemed to flow effortlessly, carrying with them a depth of emotion and a beauty that captivated everyone present. The elderly nun's hands moved with a fluidity that belied her age, and the room became enveloped in the sound of her playing. She played as she had never played before, every note filled with her life experiences, her joys, and her sorrows. The audience watched in silence, their attention completely captured. Some held their breath, while others felt tears prick at their eyes. There was no need for words, no need for explanation. The music spoke for itself, a powerful and heartfelt story told through the touch of her hands. The elderly nun felt a sense of liberation, as if every practice session, every moment of doubt, and every quiet day in the convent had led to this exact moment. As she played, she noticed the reactions of those around her. Faces softened, eyes glistened, and hearts seemed to open. It was as if the music reached into the very essence of each listener, touching something universal and timeless. She felt a quiet connection with the audience, a bond created not by speech but by the simple, profound language of music. Each phrase she played carried intention and emotion, a message of hope, courage, and the beauty of perseverance. The elderly nun's mind drifted briefly to her fellow sisters, imagining their pride and joy. She knew they had supported her quietly, and their faith had given her strength. The young visitor who had championed her presence stood nearby, smiling warmly, and she felt gratitude for the belief that had allowed her to step forward. In that moment, she realized that courage was not only personal but also shared. The support and encouragement of others had given her the wings to rise above her fears and reveal her true self. When the final note lingered in the air and faded into silence, the room erupted in applause. The sound was overwhelming, yet gentle in its sincerity. People stood, some moved to tears, others smiling broadly, all acknowledging the beauty and power of her performance. The elderly nun sat for a moment, letting the experience wash over her, her chest swelling with a mix of relief, joy, and pride. She had done more than play music. She had touched hearts, shared her story without words, and proven to herself that passion and courage could overcome fear and time. The coordinators and organizers approached, expressing admiration and awe at the performance. Interviews were requested, and cameras captured her playing for a wider audience. She felt humbled by the attention, not seeking recognition but understanding that her story might inspire others. The elderly nun realized that her journey was more than a personal triumph. It was a reminder to everyone that talent, passion, and perseverance have no age limit. After the event, as the guests mingled and shared their impressions, the elderly nun returned to the piano for a quiet moment alone. She pressed a few keys softly, savoring the simple joy of the instrument. The experience had been extraordinary, but it also reminded her of why she played in the first place. Music was not about applause or fame. It was about connection, expression, and the sharing of beauty. She smiled to herself, grateful for the opportunity to rediscover her passion and share it with the world. Back at the convent, her fellow sisters welcomed her with quiet celebration. They admired her courage and the grace with which she had performed. The elderly nun felt a sense of belonging and support that was deeply comforting. She knew that her life of devotion, patience, and care had prepared her for this moment, and that the music she played was a reflection not only of her skill but also of her heart and spirit. As evening fell, the elderly nun sat by the piano once more, reflecting on the day. The sun had set, casting long shadows across the hall, and the world outside grew calm. She thought about the obstacles she had faced, the doubts that had tried to hold her back, and the perseverance that had allowed her to succeed. She realized that her journey was not just about a single performance but about reclaiming a part of herself she had almost forgotten. Music had become a bridge between her past and her present, a way to express her soul and touch the hearts of others. She placed her hands gently on the keys, feeling the familiar texture and weight. With a quiet smile, she began to play a soft, tender melody, one that spoke of gratitude, hope, and the simple joys of life. The notes echoed through the empty hall, a private celebration of the courage, love, and dedication that had brought her to this point. In that moment, the elderly nun understood something profound, that life's most meaningful achievements are not always measured by recognition or applause, but by the courage to follow one's heart and the willingness to share one's gift with the world. After the event, the elderly nun returned to the convent with a heart full of emotions. She had stepped beyond the familiar walls of her quiet life and shared a piece of herself with the world. The applause, the smiles, and even the tears of the audience lingered in her mind, leaving a warmth she had not expected. She walked slowly through the convent gardens, feeling the soft earth beneath her feet, the scent of flowers in the air, and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. Each step reminded her that courage was not only about grand gestures, but also about quiet, persistent effort over time. Her fellow sisters welcomed her warmly, some clapping quietly, others offering gentle words of praise. The elderly nun felt humbled by their admiration. She knew that the journey she had undertaken was deeply personal, and their acknowledgement was a reflection of the support and love that had sustained her. In the days that followed, the convent seemed to glow with a quiet excitement. The sisters spoke softly among themselves about her performance, inspired by her courage and the beauty of her music. Even those who had once doubted her abilities found themselves moved by her determination and grace. The elderly nun returned to her daily routines, but everything had changed. Tending the garden, preparing meals, and helping others now felt enriched with a new sense of purpose. The music she had rediscovered flowed through her days like a gentle river, bringing joy not only to herself but also to those around her. She played softly in the hallways as she moved from task to task, letting the melodies linger in the air. Her sisters would pause in their work, listening and smiling, finding comfort and inspiration in the simple, heartfelt music. News of her performance spread beyond the convent walls. Visitors came to hear her play, drawn not only by the skill of her fingers, but by the story of resilience and passion that accompanied her music. The elderly nun welcomed them with humility, sharing her melodies with a quiet smile. She did not seek recognition, but she understood the power of her example. People who had thought they were too old or too limited to pursue their dreams saw in her a reminder that it is never too late to follow one's heart. As weeks passed, the nun's music began to inspire others in unexpected ways. Young musicians sought her advice, learning not only about technique but also about the patience, dedication, and love that imbued each note. Older members of the community, who had long abandoned their own passions, felt encouraged to return to their hobbies and talents. Her story became a quiet testament to the enduring power of passion, practice, and belief in oneself. She was not a celebrity. She was a human being who had embraced her gift and shared it courageously, touching hearts in the process. The elderly nun herself found a profound sense of peace and fulfillment. Playing the piano had always been a source of joy, but now it carried a deeper meaning. Each note she pressed was a reflection of her life, her experiences, and the lessons she had learned. Music had become a language through which she could express emotions that words could not capture. It reminded her of the beauty of persistence, the importance of embracing opportunities, and the value of courage in the face of doubt. She also noticed how her journey had changed her perspective on age and ability. She understood that limitations were often more mental than physical, and that courage and dedication could overcome obstacles that once seemed insurmountable. Her story was not just about playing the piano. It was about reclaiming a part of herself that had been dormant, proving that talent, passion, and joy do not diminish with age. The years had given her a depth of emotion and understanding that enriched her music in ways she could not have imagined as a young performer. The convent continued to support her in her musical endeavors. They helped maintain the piano, created space for her practice, and encouraged her performances, small though they might be. The elderly nun found herself looking forward to each day, knowing that she could share her gift, even in quiet ways. She played for the sisters during morning gatherings, for visitors who came to listen, and sometimes for herself alone in the stillness of the evening. Music had become an inseparable part of her life once more, a source of inspiration and joy that flowed naturally from her heart. The impact of her performance reached beyond the immediate audience. Letters arrived from people who had heard about her story, expressing gratitude and admiration. Some wrote that her courage had inspired them to pursue their own dreams, whether in music, art, or personal growth. Others shared stories of challenges they faced in later life, and how her example encouraged them to persevere. The elderly nun read these letters with quiet humility, realizing that her journey had touched lives in ways she had never anticipated. She felt a deep sense of connection to the broader community, understanding that her music and her story could resonate far beyond the walls of the convent. In the quiet moments of reflection, the elderly nun thought about the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the doubts, the physical challenges, and the fear of failure that had once seemed insurmountable. She recalled the encouragement of the younger sisters and the young visitor who had believed in her when she hesitated. She realized that courage often grows in small steps, nurtured by patience, support, and a willingness to face uncertainty. Her music was a culmination of these steps, a testament to the power of perseverance and the beauty of following one's heart. As she continued to play, the elderly nun also reflected on the lessons she had learned about humility and gratitude. She understood that talent alone was not enough. It had to be paired with dedication, love, and a willingness to share with others. The applause and recognition were gratifying, but what mattered most was the connection she felt with the music and with the people who listened. Each performance was an act of sharing, a way to bring a little light and joy into the lives of others. She realized that this, more than anything, was the true reward of her journey. Her daily life in the convent remained simple, yet it was enriched with purpose and meaning. She continued her duties, tended to the garden, and cared for her fellow sisters. But now there was music in every corner of her day. The piano, once a silent piece of furniture, had become a symbol of hope, resilience, and joy. Each time she played, she celebrated not only her talent but also the courage it had taken to reclaim it. She found fulfillment in the knowledge that her passion could inspire others, proving that life's gifts are never truly lost if one has the courage to embrace them. Over time, the elderly nun's story became a quiet legend in the local community. People spoke of the nun who had been blocked from playing piano but had persevered to create something beautiful and lasting. Her life became an example of how determination, faith, and love for one's craft could overcome obstacles, age, and doubt. She did not seek fame or recognition, yet her story inspired countless others to reconnect with their own passions and pursue what they loved, regardless of the challenges they faced. The elderly nun often returned to the piano in solitude, letting the music carry her through reflections on life, gratitude, and hope. Each note was a reminder of the journey she had undertaken, the obstacles she had overcome, and the courage she had discovered within herself. She played not only to share her gift with others, but also to honor the life she had lived and the lessons she had learned. Music had become a bridge between her past and present, a way to express the depth of her heart and spirit. As the sun set over the convent, casting long shadows across the garden and halls, the elderly nun sat at the piano, fingers poised above the keys. She closed her eyes and began to play, letting the music flow naturally, freely, and beautifully. The notes filled the room with warmth, hope, and joy, carrying the story of a life lived with devotion, courage, and passion. In that moment, she understood that the true measure of achievement was not applause or recognition, but the courage to embrace one's gifts and the willingness to share them with the world. She had played, she had persevered, and she had inspired, leaving a legacy that would resonate long after the final note had faded.